we've worked on were related to like local foods, local places, and broadband issues, cool and connected. We have different programs. We actually partnered with financial relationships and in implementing technical assistance. In other cases, other programs have never worked with the regional commissions and may not even know what they are or what power they bring. So just putting that on the table, and if I invite anyone to share what their level of experience is and any insights you might have about what's unique in partnering with regional commissions. And we saw Ava come in and record this, and I hope that's okay with everyone. So, and I'm assuming it's just for note-taking purposes, and so we can get the most out of this.
Do we have to raise our hands?
You don't have to. No, please raise your hand, but since you've already jumped in and no one else was, why don't you start us off?
Okay, my name is Joe James, and I put some information in the chat about what my company and I do. We are involved in very innovative ways of capturing lots of CO2, then remediating air, soil, and water at the same time. And then we harvest the crops and convert them into a variety of bioproducts. So we're already active in the region. We'd like to do more to help out. I have worked in regional types of activities. And one of the things that I've noticed is that it appears that the federal agencies don't necessarily sort of collaborate as closely with each other as could be extremely helpful in actually solving some of the challenges and benefiting some of the opportunities that are in a particular region. So I would encourage more of that to happen, particularly in this proposed regional effort. The other thing that I've included in my chat is that as I've been developing my company, I've noticed that things like PM 2.5 pollution, but especially tire wear pollution. You know, when tires are moving up and down a road, microscopic pieces of the tread are being rubbed off the tire. And when you consider what tires are made from, including things like carbon black, which is essentially made by purposefully underburning oil and creating soot. So the arsenic, lead, and mercury that's in carbon black is being essentially spread throughout the environment, and particularly at-risk communities of color that are downwind or east of Interstate 95 or downwind of any major highway are being bombarded by both PM 2.5 as well as tire wear. And I would hope that specifically EPA would start looking into tire wear to provide information about where it's being concentrated and also what the composition of tire wear is, because if it contains what I think it contains, it's very harmful to humans and to animals and to the environment generally.
James, thank you for bringing that to my awareness. I wasn't even knowledgeable about, or I am not knowledgeable about that particular issue. And it's good to know, I think, as we think about siting new facilities or what kind of economic development comes into our communities, knowing fully what the potential environmental issues are associated with them is important. I think you're raising that point, if whether you meant to or not. So thank you for that. In addition to raising our awareness as the EPA to this particular issue. So any other thoughts? Others have comments related to federal partnerships to address economic development, how to partner with regional commissions? There's a sort of beautiful new opportunity of working with a brand new regional commission.
Hello.
Yes, Elizabeth, I hear you. Are you ready to share a comment?
Yes, my name's Elizabeth Bell. I live on the peninsula on the Eastern Shore, and I work with a small nonprofit organization, and we're trying to get money for water and septic, well, water and septic, and there are other things. We are a small community. I am one of 5 members, and we have to work with people on a local level. And apparently, they do accept the information that we provide for them, but it doesn't get any further than that. And it's like complete this application, and we have spoken with people on the federal level with regards to help for our community. Yeah, we are one of those poverty-stricken areas that needs help. And apparently we're not getting anywhere. People are getting discouraged. And we just need to know that we have the abilities to get help from the local area. And I'm sure the federal does provide funds for our area, but we're not getting them. That's my concern. Just getting money from the federal level to people that are, in small communities.
Yeah, I hear that. Elizabeth, thank you so much for sharing that. I don't know that we have time to troubleshoot on that. I'm like really curious about what you see as perhaps the barriers for getting the funding at the local level. You mentioned you mentioned that you're not getting anywhere, and this is something that we're really interested in. And it sounds like there is going to be a lot more collaboration happening between whether it's USDA or EPA and potentially with the new regional commission. And so I'm curious sort of what you think could be done, if it's up to us, or is it really the money often goes through the local agencies, if there's something that needs to be done at the local level.
Okay, you're suggesting that we sort of speak with the local levels. Again, we have, and they've said that it's a process. I think mostly it's they can't get contractors and vendors to come here, people to come and to provide the services that are needed. But I've heard that there have been contractors that has tried to coming to the area, and they're been blocked. So I just want to let you know that there are areas like ours that do need help, and we're not getting it from our local. I know the money has to go through one of the local offices, but we're not getting it.
Okay, thank you for bringing it up. So, while fully appreciating that there are things that money isn't getting to every community that needs it, and we're going to need to figure out systems to help make that difference, or enable more of the money to get to where it needs to. What are some existing things you are aware of, opportunities? And this is, I think, aimed at identifying, like in the chat, I noticed some folks talking about the Southeast Care Coalition. What are maybe some other existing efforts that could be piggybacked on or leveraged to try to get the money to go to the places where we have really marginalized or vulnerable communities, or where the targets are from the perspective of equity?
This is Corey Hall. I'm from the Southern Georgia Regional Commission. And one thing I might say is that I don't think there's any, there's plenty of locations to spend money throughout the Southeast Crescent region. I don't think any of us are going to argue that. But I think that it does come down to the capacity of that local government often, their desire to want to make an investment. I'm primarily coming from the infrastructure and maybe community development angle. You know, in our experience, even with traditional programs, sometimes local governments, they don't have the financial capacity to handle it. So I think highlighting how maybe other regional commissions in the past have been able to work with local governments that do not have that financial capacity to implement programs would be beneficial. But then maybe trying to say, yes, you maybe don't immediately have the financial capacity, but maybe making sure that they see how if you, it's almost like if you build it, this will happen. This may lead to future economic prosperity, economic benefit in your community. Trying to communicate that to a lot of rural local governments is a challenge in many cases. And I think those would be maybe good examples to learn from those other areas.
Corey, I want to ask you a follow-up, if you don't mind, engage on that. So in my, in some cases, I know with economic development, there's a tendency or a desire to like build, if you build it, they will come, and then like say an industrial corridor or industrial hub area or something, and then they're not able to attract the business or the business or the industry into that space. And so then you've got sort of the precious federal funds, taxpayer dollars that don't meet anyone's needs. They didn't, you know, and then you built a road or you've built the sewer capacity, you've spent it on a space that no one goes to. And I think there's a lot of examples, and I'm curious if others want to pipe in on that, where there's somebody else had an idea in the community of how to spend those monies differently, and they weren't heard or they weren't engaged in the decision making. And so there's enough examples like that where it's, you know, there is a structural issue to how the money often gets decided to be spent, or the local governments, you know, I've heard this, the local government capacity is important, right? You don't want to overwhelm a community that's never seen more than $1 million, you know, with a loan or a financial burden of even administering a government grant. Like that can be really difficult if you've never done it before. So you definitely we want to provide technical assistance. We want to provide support. And there's local governments who may have resistance to taking on investments, perhaps because of their values of like which thing they want to invest in. So how do we break that down, or how do we make a change there? Olivia, I said a lot, so it could have been on anything of this, or you could rewind.
I kind of want to shift the.
Yeah.
I just want to turn the ship a little bit. I'm Olivia Collier. You'll hear from my colleague and I, Brittany Pittman, and several of other of us that do this work every day. In a little bit, so I was going to try to be quiet, but I thought since this was a small group, it might be helpful to kind of to set some foundation of how we do this. And Corey, you made some really good points. I will say with ARC funds, the way, and this every state does this a little differently, so keep that in mind. There are 13 states, and our governors have different prerogatives at times. But the way the commission in general is structured, and when you ask the question, you open, what is a federal partnership? We actually say, what is a federal, state, and local government partnership? Because we do see it as a three-legged stool, and all three legs have to work together. And Joe McKinney, who's going to facilitate our afternoon conversation, represents a number of development districts across the country. And that's how that's not the only way, but that is one way we get at the local priorities. And I think, Corey, you represent one of those organizations. When we are looking at projects to fund, And grantees do not have to just be local units of government. I just want to make sure folks are aware of that. It's anybody but an individual and a for-profit that is eligible for ARC funds. And I would assume that will be the same for the Southeast Crescent once grant dollars are available, and they're not currently. We look to see both the capacity of the organization, but also is the project thought out? Was there a strategic plan? Is there community buy-in? We do ask those questions as grant reviewers and grant managers. I want to make sure that's really clear, that it's not just Joe Schmo picks up the phone and calls somebody and a grant happens. We've all heard stories of how things get funded at times that aren't necessary or needed, but I will say we are very intentional in ARC, and I would hope that the Southeast Crescent would be modeled that way. My colleagues and I, we talk across state borders. I talk to the LDD directors and their staffs all the time about projects that matter, but we talk to other folks in communities as well about what projects really need to happen in a community. Does that mean we don't sometimes fund things that flop? To your comment about the industrial park, that does happen on occasion, but I would say it doesn't happen as often as the general public probably thinks, because we're very intentional and do an incredible amount of due diligence to make sure the investments we're making, with very limited, in some cases, federal tax dollars, that they're going to where they're needed. I just wanted to set the baseline that is the intent, particularly from Brittany and I and our colleagues, and you'll hear from a couple of us this afternoon, that's our role at the state level, is to work hand in hand with locals from a variety of spaces, elected officials and non-electeds. We like to work with the community spark plugs to figure out where their needs are. I like to say ARC is all about being flexible, and I would hope the Southeast Crescent would model that. We are really trying to meet community needs, given the parameters that are established by Congress and the president, and then our governors. It is complicated, but we hope that we do it, and I think Brittany and I do it with a lot of partners to make sure that the investments are tangible. And it's not just money spent. We try to really make sure it's an investment in a community. I hope I didn't ramble too much, but I just kind of wanted to set the playing field of what this looks like on the ground, how this works.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Olivia. No, really appreciate your comments and your participation, and especially given that you're going to be talking later today, and so you're giving us a preview. Ava, you showed up on screen. Did you have any thoughts or comments you wanted to? Okay, you're just joining us.
Just joining,
Awesome.
enjoying the dialogue.
Okay. So what we've just we've gone through, what do we mean by a federal partnership, and appreciate the broadening of the scope. Really, I think we're talking about partnering with a regional commission, and the regional commission is federal and state. And of course, we need the local level engaged with that. So glad to have that be explicit. And sort of some of acknowledging some of the intentions behind what we're trying to accomplish. And that there are some, also folks have shared some concerns or issues about the money not getting to where their needs are being met. And of course, yes, there's not enough money to go around for everyone. And so where we pay attention matters in where the money goes. And of course, capacity matters. So these are just recapping a few of the things we've heard, like ability to actually absorb any assistance, and also what we need, having a plan and buy-in, community buy-in for how any funding is used. Those were all things mentioned so far. I had a question, sort of taking us to in this last 5 minutes. What are some new or innovative activities that you'd like to see implemented in the next 6 to 12 months related to this kind of partnering across federal, state, local? What's the next level?
Dr. Erica Holloman-Hill here out of Atlanta. It's great to meet everyone. Born and raised here in Atlanta, but most of my professional work started there in Virginia with the creation of the Southeast Care Coalition. And I wanted to highlight that because CARE provided an opportunity to get those federal resources down to the ground. However, through that application, it had to be approved by the regional commission. And this was our first time interacting with the regional commission to one, even say, this is what we're interested in, but to know that we needed their approval. And then it helped to have Congressman Bobby Scott already be informed of what we were doing. So by the time it hit the regional commission, there was already that dialogue. So for us, it was a learning that we didn't really know what this regional commission space was even about until we went through this grant application. And I think on the ground, you have a lot of organizations that don't really interact with the regional commissions, but yet these commissions are impacting the lives based on the decisions that come out of this regional body. And so because everything is so disjointed and siloed, and that's just kind of the way that federal and state agencies work, any opportunity where there's more synergy and interaction, where I'm always one, so much of this has already been done. Don't go and reinvent the wheel. Look at your federal agency working groups. Go ahead and pull from all of your EJ communities and all of your federal departments that have given over 30 years of information around how to engage better with community and federal partners. And then for the regional commissions, you know, there are a lot of federal partners that have done great in establishing community relationships. And so there's some learnings that I think can be lent there at that state level that really ultimately helps with the bottlenecking. That's what happens. The federal funds start at the top, but then the bottleneck starts. Bam, it hits the regional, bam, it hits the states, bam, it hits the cities. And then if we're lucky, if we even know about how to maneuver through the layers, then we get something, right? But for those that don't even know that the layers exist, what about them? And so I just want to kind of bring in that highlight and the importance that we found by coming through the CARE grant program, which was one of the most successful CARE grant programs that EPA has ever done that really funded community.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Erica. When you mentioned the CARE program is actually something that I worked on early in my career and love that it continues to get kudos. I'm curious, one thing you said about the commission, which commission did you get exposed to through that grant? Because the Southeast Crescent was not in existence. So it must have been one of the other.
The Hampton Roads Regional Commission.
Right, she's referring to their local development district.
The local.
Got it.
Yep.
Maybe
I just learned something new here. The difference, right? The layers. Don't create more layers for community.
Got it. It looks like our breakout room is going to close in 51 seconds. So I just want to thank you all for your active participation. I think there were some really nice, there was some good engagement here, and we'll go back to the breakout room. I took a few notes, which I can report back on, and look forward to the rest of the afternoon's conversation and presenters. Thank you all.
Thank you. So welcome back, everyone. And I hope you had some engaging discussion in your breakout sessions. I'm going to ask if you would mute yourself, first of all. And secondly, let's hear the report backs from each of the groups. And Chitra, we'll start with you and the first federal partnership group.
Sure, thank you so much. Our group had about 20 people in it and had a really nice conversation about what we started off talking about framing it as federal partnerships, but quickly realized we're all talking about community, state, local, state, federal partnerships. We're talking about how to partner generally. And we had some good comments about working together for a common goal is what we're talking about. And really wanting to get down to the community level with the grants and any kind of funding. We talked about the uniqueness of working with federal commissions, even if we partnered before with other federal agencies. Federal commissions have their own unique status. And so knowing about that, sometimes communities actually learn about the different structures of government, whether it's federal, state, or local, by actually having a grant. And one example was with the CARE Southeast Coalition that was developed by the CARE program, or that was initiated with a CARE grant a while back. We also heard about some environmental issues that people are struggling with, where for example, PM 2.5 being an air pollution issue that's coming up from tires, and needing to be mindful of the kinds of environmental pollution that comes with development and addressing those or mitigating those as we think about economic development. We acknowledged that with examples from the ARC region about what's worked well, and one of those things is attending to capacity of a community, making sure there's a strategic plan, and that there's community buy-in when grants are selected. And we also talked about the importance of having additional conversation between different entities in order to support communities. Like federal governments are not always as coordinated as they might be to be most helpful to communities. And we also acknowledge the fact that there's a lot of need, and sometimes local governments have inability to be able to absorb capital, absorb any investment. So also acknowledge that there's other entities, that private sector and nonprofits can play a role to buttress local government capacity if that's not there, or perhaps there's other interests that need to be tended to. So I think I've covered everything and appreciate the dialogue.
Thank you.
Heading back to you, Ava. Yeah.
Thank you. And so we'll hear from Tami, Thomas-Burton, for about federal partnerships room 2.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Ava. We had a great discussion and you cut us off.
Sorry.
We were having such a good time, but we understand. So we got through some of our questions. I actually posed 6 questions to our group, and we went around and shared the best of the best. We had just a great team. So the first question we talked about is, what does federal partnership look like to you? What does it mean to you? And basically, out of that discussion, we heard it really means layering resources. It's an opportunity for you to layer resources through, through your federal partners. And we had one well-known community leader in our group who talked about, just stepped us through really nicely and quickly how she leveraged, a federal agency resource, one agency, which led her to some national visibility on their interagency, federal agency working group to showcase her project. And then this connected her further to university partners, which connected her to some capacity building resources. So, just having that systems thinking processing, how do you connect the dots and continue to build on your project? And then also convening, EPA is known for being a convener of other federal partners. So getting those other feds together in whatever capacity. So leveraging resources. Then we talked about, have you ever partnered with a federal commission? And so we had a few on there that said yes. And the benefits of that, again, was partnership and collaboration in a different arena. And also from that, you will learn best practices and learn best practices in other states outside of our region. You know, we had a Pennsylvania example of that. And then you can share resources, knowledge, and experiences. So don't start from ground zero, leverage what we've already done. The next question we talked about, what hasn't worked or needs to change when it comes to federal partnerships or agencies. And I asked them to, you know, we've got tough skin at EPA, so you can give it to us. Because the ultimate goal is for us to me, whenever you have a problem, it's an opportunity to change and to do something different. And we're going to forge ahead in the Southeast. So we got to address those issues. So we talked about building trust and relationships. And also we had someone in our group, Dominique, say, great idea. She says that each federal agency should have a place where you could come in and you could just go to the Fed and click on a link and say, I want to chat with a Fed partner. You know, now EPA, we're doing something new, similar to this. We're doing what we call open door sessions, where for example, we have a tool that we use called EJ Screen. So we have open door sessions every month where you can come in, and if you're interested in that topic, anybody in the country can come in and talk about and ask your questions. So so the folks in our group said all of the feds should have something like that, you know, so that we don't have to try to find the needle in the haystack when it comes to, you know, where the resources are, who are the key contacts. So I thought that was an excellent idea. We also heard from in our group that what hasn't worked is that they think that the federal agency should do more flexing of their muscles and being a better watchdog of our state agencies, because they feel like our communities are not getting the resources that they need and that the funding is not being allocated accordingly. So, and then the last question we talked about is what are some innovative activities that you'd like to see implemented in the next 6 to 12 months? And then Ava cut us off, so we didn't get to talk about that. And that's all I have to report.
Well, my apologies for cutting you off. We'll do better next time. I wish that we could have, you know, next time we will build in more breakout rooms and more discussion time. We had one day and we're trying to pack it all into the one day. How about Veronica? Can we hear about what you guys thought about philanthropy in the Southeast?
Yes, I would first like to say you cut us off. We were just getting going.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
But
I'm just going to apologize for the rest of the day.
We had a wonderful discussion, and we didn't get to all of our questions because we talked thoroughly about the barriers and challenges. And one of the first things was that sometimes there's difficulties in the application process. You know, the information that is often needed for people to make grant making, such as Social Security or other important information, people are leery of sharing that. There's also limited infrastructure in even being able to upload the application or provide the application, because these communities are typically underdeveloped. So, you know, broadband, digital literacy, the lack of equipment. So just the basic, you know, challenges of philanthropy. And then the lack of trust. The fact that in many of these communities, people have, in good faith, gone to local opportunities to give their feedback and their input and their intellectual property, only to find out that that information was used to pursue and receive a grant that they didn't get any resources for, or you know, the resources weren't shared. And so I think that's important, that building of trust in order to do the things that we want to do is going to be very important in building philanthropy. We also discussed the importance of building relationships. The lack of resources over time has created competition amongst communities and groups. And so it's very important for them to act collectively if they're going to be successful in philanthropy. And so there's work to do there. Also, the under-resourced community-based organizations that lack the capacity to do the work that they would like to do, the lack of money for matching funds for many of these grants. And so Tamara Holmes gave us some wonderful information about the fact that in these commissions and authorities, there's resources for technical assistance. So making sure that we tap into the resources that this commission will have available in order to do the work that we want to do with the philanthropic community. And then Mickey talked also about the regional networks that already exist. So we need to make sure that we have a regional strategic approach in how we do philanthropy moving forward. When there's a crisis, a lot of people come to the South and then there's no strategy or anything like that. So we had a great conversation. I'll stop there, but we have a lot of challenges that we can overcome, and we're resilient people and we can do it.
So thank you. Before we move on to Alicia's, I'm gonna do a little housekeeping adjustment, and I'm going to give folks the opportunity to take the break and leave and return at 2:30 in time for Nathaniel Smith, or to stay with us so that we can hear from you. I want to give you an opportunity, those of you who are in the audience, to respond to some of what you've heard today and some of what you've discussed, because our agenda for the rest of the day is going to be pretty tight. And I want to give us an opportunity for you to start getting some feedback here along the way. So if you have to leave, and we'll see you back when you get finished, but we're going to work through to 2:30 if that's okay with the rest of you. With that, I'm going to turn over to Alicia.
Thank you, Ava. Like Veronica's group, we started out talking about the challenges with grant making in the Southeast, and we really focused on much of what Veronica's group touched on, but really understanding the community's true needs versus trying to force it into a particular grant. So getting at the real issues so that you can be a true partner was a lot of what our conversation focused around. And we also talked about the flow of funds, that sometimes the sharing of resources along the way dilutes what's actually available to put towards the implementation phase. So just talk that is a challenge when we're really looking at the funding put to work. And like Veronica's group, we did talk about capacity, especially like just having access to grant writers to help fill out these opportunities and to search out opportunities. And also discussed how having flexible dollars can really support community partners because they need that flexibility with some of those fundings. When we started talking about who needs to be at the table and what their role needs to be, we liked building on some of the earlier conversations today that governance is really going to matter, making sure those community partners get to the table, but also they're not just consultants or advisors, they get to help weigh in on those decisions. So whatever we can do as the commission gets stood up to help influence the ability for those community partners to help make decisions, we think will serve the region well. And we really like the idea of having that equity liaison who would be not only intentional, but also persistent in getting the right voices to the table. We talked about the need for those trusted community leaders. I think Veronica and maybe Tami, you also hit on trust a little bit. Trusted and respected community leaders, whether they come from faith-based organizations, just community leaders that understand the legacy, the culture of the area, are really needed to help make a huge impact as we move forward versus just having the outside entities coming in to guide this work. We did talk about some good examples of successes, and we felt that what was truly at the basis is when the community gets to lead the process, and some of the agencies and others that are coming to help take more of a follower or a back seat position versus allowing the communities to lead and help drive the change in the region.
Thank you. And now, Gloria, it's time for your diversity, equity, and inclusion feedback on racial equity.
Okay. All right. So we had about 13 people in our group. Many of them were from nonprofit organizations, a few from federal organizations, a few from colleges, universities. And when I asked what racial equity meant to them, these were the answers: primarily social and economic parity, unity, fairness, filling the gap, having access, mobility and stability, impartiality, righting historic wrongs, accountability, and fairness. Those were the general responses. And then we went into President Biden's executive order and talked about what it meant in terms of his definition of equity as it relates to the executive order. And we then talked about the report that was submitted by OMB, which was a requirement of the executive order, that there be a report done to study how to measure equity, right? And before I go into that, I needed to get to my page where we talked about the definition. I'd just like to share that with the group. So according to Biden's executive order, equity in general means the consistent and systematic, fair and just and impartial treatment of all individuals, including individuals who belong to underserved communities that have been denied such treatment, such as Black, Latino, Indigenous and Native Americans, Asian Americans, Pacific Islanders, and other persons of color. And then it goes on to say members of religious minorities, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer, LGBTQ plus persons, persons with disabilities, persons who live in rural areas, and persons otherwise adversely affected by persistent poverty or inequality. So that was the president's definition of equity as it relates to his executive order. And then we talked about the findings of that study generally. And then they had 5 findings. And the one that was interesting was that even though equity is something that we are interested in measuring, and there are various tools to measure it, it's still a very new thing to the US government, even though places like the United Kingdom has been doing this for decades. It's relatively new to us. And the finding says that there are administrative burdens for doing it. And the federal government said it's committed to relieving some of those and mitigating some of those burdens. And that the federal government needs to expand opportunities for meaningful stakeholder engagement and adopt more accessible mechanisms for co-designing programs and services. So we went through the findings, and then we talked about the different assessment tools that are available. There's one by the Meta Corporation that is focused only on federal agencies. There's one that was developed by Harvard and Bloomberg that focuses on cities that are looking to deal with issues of equity, particularly as it relates to economic development. And then there's this very straightforward 2-page document put out by Race Forward that deals with racial equity impact assessment. And so we had a few minutes to go over it. We needed more time. Of course, there wasn't enough, Ava, so it's your fault.
I'm sorry.
So we quickly went through the various, the why, the what, the why, and the when, and the where of racial equity impact assessment. And I just want to share this definition that Race Forward put put forward. It says racial equity impact assessment is a systematic examination of how different racial and ethnic groups will likely be impacted or affected by a proposed action or decision. So it's like doing like an environmental impact statement. You know, before you do development, you want to know what kind of impacts will happen. And they're saying that this needs to be a standard part of how we do business when it comes to programs and proposals that might impact different racial groups differently. And they give, you know, a list of 10 questions that you should ask when proposing an action. And it has to come before the decision is made, at least at a minimum while you're making that decision. And there's some great tools that we provided in a link to folks to access if they want to learn more about how they can better implement racial equity assessments. And that's it.
Well, thank you for those presentations. We have about 10 minutes. And so I'm going to open the floor to those of you who have been listening patiently and taking all of this in. One of the things that I shared at the start of this process was that last year, we had so many brilliant minds in community and economic development across the region in the audience that we did not hear enough from you. And so I wanted to make sure that we built time into the agenda, hence the breakout sessions, hence this moment right now, to hear from those of you across the region, to share some of your ideas about what you feel about the commission, about what you've heard so far today, or any other contributions you'd like to make. So if you just raise your hand, I will acknowledge you. Is there anyone? I think I see.
Ava, you may have to tell them how to get to the hand raising.
Oh, if you, okay, well, Dealey, help us out. Where do they raise the hand at? Is it?
So if you go to the reactions on the bottom, it's like the second to last, there's a raised hand. But everybody should have the ability to unmute if they want to just.
Or just unmute, absolutely. You can unmute if you would like. Does anyone have anything to share? Well, I see that our next speaker, Mr. Nathaniel Smith, has joined us. So if there aren't any maybe if he doesn't mind, we can get started about 5 minutes early. And that way, because he has built in some discussion time after his session, and he has 3 questions that he's going to pose to you. And I hope that you will engage him in responding to those questions. And Tamara, are you with us?
Are you still taking questions?
I'm here.
We will take questions, Mr. James, if you like, but I'm going to ask one thing. Tamara, did I hear Tamara say she's with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, good. So I'm going to ask you if you would introduce Nathaniel after we hear from Mr. James. How about that?
Okay, not a problem.
Thank you.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the opportunity. I may have spoken earlier about my concerns for environmental impacts that are hurting the minority community disproportionately. And I mentioned PM 2.5, which is a fine particulate matter. And I also mentioned tire wear. There's been some research related to to PM 2.5, and it's increasing the severity of COVID-19, et cetera, et cetera. However, tire wear, from my opinion, has been understudied by federal agencies. And I would hope that my question is, can EPA, HHS, and other appropriate agencies, DOT, for example, begin to take a look at tire wear, which are very fine particles that are rubbed off your tire every time it turns, and it gets into the air, soil, and water, and unfortunately into the lungs of human beings, and carries with it pretty dangerous chemicals. And my understanding, I've included in the chat before some of the articles that I've been reading and looking for recently. And given the nature of this region with its extensive highway system, I think it's critical to the health and well-being of the people that live in the region that we understand more about the impact of both tire wear and PM 2.5.
Thank you. Thank you for that contribution.